Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is July 26, 2025. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Please subscribe. Also want to thank our guest Alfred for putting up his Thelonious Monk tutorials on YouTube. That's how we met. We did part one, February 28th of this year. And it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here with you again, Alfred Yun. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Okay, and I wanted to congratulate you on both your new album and your Kennedy Center. Wow, really, really exciting stuff there, dude. So we're gonna jump right into where we left off in part two.
Sure. Yeah.
Was simple question. Marshall McLuhan says that all words are metaphorical. You talked a lot about symbols in part one. If all words are metaphorical, then the word literal is a metaphor for what?
That's a really interesting question. Literal. So I don't have an exact question for literal itself because I think that I would have to think about that more. But I think it will partly answer what any word means. Any word that's supposed to be concrete means, with the context of when you say everything is a metaphor at heart. So I've been reading, the philosopher Jacques Derrida, recently.
Yes.
And there's a concept by Derrida that I think is so fascinating, and it's a really key concept of this. It's kind of helping me understand some parts about it. But there's a concept he calls iterability. And what he means is that a word doesn't just have a meaning based on so I guess a better example is, so when you send a letter to someone, and even after you're dead, a person can read that letter and still make sense of it, right? And history books, after you write them down, inherently every word has the possibility to go beyond the meaning of its conception, right? So literature itself is, even that which is supposed to be literal has the ability to go beyond what it was literally supposed to mean, and what the original intender is supposed to. So even things that are supposed to be time and location specific, like a letter Derrida often talks about, it has the ability to go beyond the lifespan of the person who wrote it, and it has if the letter is historically important, we'll keep talking about it, and new meanings will be added. So it's interesting that you said the part about the metaphor, which is why I'm talking about all this. If you just ask me what is literal, then I will probably give you more of a dictionary answer. But because of the context you gave, based on that metaphor, I think what literal to me means is when we are narrowing down the iterability of words, which is it's almost infinite. It can, that's what it means to be participating in language. Is language has the capacity to go beyond its origin, right? Like a letter has, and literal is the opposite. It's the act of narrowing it down for whatever purpose we're using it for. So science, we take language to be more literally than perhaps poetry. But I think, like you said in the beginning, at the core of it, at the heart of it all, even science, even the most literal and accurate and specific words and vocabulary and sentences and concepts, at their heart, I think, like Derrida says, iterability is at the heart of it. And iterability is kind of linked to metaphors, right? And that metaphors branch out. They make connections based on other things that are similar, but it's not a connection of literal connection, right? Metaphors make an iterability. I think metaphor is also part of what's driving what Derrida talks about when it comes to iterability.
Really,
But
really
yeah,
good.
those are the thoughts that came to my head.
Alfred, that was really brilliant. But the word is it INTER ability?
Oh, iterability, like reiteration, like ITERA ability.
ITERA ability.
The ability, iterability.
Okay, thank you. So two things you evoked were um, I study etymology all the time, and I love it because that's the science. We trust these people did the research, but every fifth word, or so often, it says of unknown origin. It's
Yeah.
like every word is of unknown origin, but they
Yeah.
just made this up. But they want to narrow it down. Your word narrowing down, and then I say this for years: words evoke more than their meaning. I
Oh yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's what you're saying in a lot of
Yep.
ways. But
Yep.
here's that was really good. So here's we we tackled the function of music, and we didn't go down my whole list, but and there's other ones like express creativity, connection, community, learning, stir emotion, self-awareness, healing, uh, appease the gods. But here's the one I got recently, and I want to read you Adorno and
Mhm.
get your thoughts.
Oh wow.
My,
Yeah.
my friend Steve said, "What is the function of music? To hypnotize people to be themselves." I
Wow.
was like shocked by that one. I was like, wow, that's deep. But then today I read Adorno says something music in a rather more subliminal way than the spoken or written word functions as a way of externalizing the human subject from itself through an act of self-reflection. So is there any connection, self-reflection, self-hypnotizing, any thoughts on both of those thoughts on the function of music?
So that those are I think there's a lot to tackle there. But one thing that first came to my mind, and I think it's something we talked about before in our conversation, where I talked about how history is made up of things we remember, right? Not all things that happened in the past. It's stuff
Yeah.
we remember. And I also feel I've been feeling similarly, especially about music as I get older, is as you get older, the music that I tend to go back to is the music that I remember, not just in terms of it's like a catchy song and you can't stop remembering it, but something that left a profound impression on you, that you keep remembering it, that it becomes a memory that you can't really escape from it. And no and that I think is one of the things that came to my mind when you talk about that. And one of the things, and at least for me, the type of music that I tend to remember more are the types of music that makes me reflect on myself a lot, like types of
Yeah.
music that I have to spend a lot of time think about. It doesn't have to necessarily be difficult music. It can be, because difficult music can or complex music can make you think more, but just whatever kind of music that keeps me thinking about it, feeling it, upon it, and connecting it to other parts of my experience. And one really interesting thing that I notice a lot is that I listen to a piece of music that has lyrics that are quite interesting. But one thing I've noticed myself doing a lot, and I think other people probably do this too, is I notice myself twisting the meaning of the lyrics to fit my experience. Like something about the music. So there's a song that I listen to that it's a Korean song, which talks about how the lyrics are talking about how please don't tell me that my love is not love.
Yeah.
Now the actual song itself is talking about um, you know a lover who has someone who has a a more obsessive relationship with their love, and someone is telling them to forget about that person and move on. But for me, I was thinking about my own life, where I've had experiences with my parents and other people, or not my actual parents, but like my uncle who raised me. Like he was kind of like my parent, and I had a contentious relationship with him. And often the societal standards that describe love have told me that, you know, he might not be, that relationship might not have been our typical loving relationship. But for some reason, when I was listening to that song, that sentence that they keep saying in that song, it kept going. I kept thinking about how it relates to my life, even though the actual song isn't really talking about me. I'm taking a part of it and making a whole nother meaning about that song. And I found and because I created my own meaning with it, I keep reflecting on it, and it's a very creative process too. And I noticed some songs, even though they're not literally talking about what happened in my life, just a piece of it, something about the way they express some part of it resonates so strongly to what I feel like has happened in my life, even though it's not literally a one-to-one reflection of it, but it captures like the way they express the emotion of that song. It even though it's not talking exactly my experience, the way they're asking the listener to not judge their love, it felt like how I would talk about my experience, which is a totally different story than this story, but just the way they're talking about it resonated so much that I kept reflecting on it, that I kept thinking about it. And that's one of the interest. And sometimes, and when I was young, I would often listen to music in languages that I didn't understand. So Japanese or French. I learned French later, but still I'm not as fluent in French as I am in Korean and English. And I notice myself, I keep applying myself and creating different stories than what was literally intended in the songs. And often songs where I have that kind of relationship with, where I'm deliberately or unconsciously going against the literal meaning of the song, I tend to have I tend to have more lasting relationships with them, which I find kind of interesting recently.
Yeah, Alfred, you stressed Serge Gainsbourg last session, and that was a beautiful way you put that, because mid-career McLuhan updated the medium is the massage, or the medium is the message, which is basically a thing. What's more important, the form or the content? Well,
right.
he knew both of them are equally important, but he said we got to pay attention to the form more, because we don't. So people misunderstood him, but mid-career, he updated, he rebooted his main aphorism to the user is the content.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing. The user's the content. And I might have mentioned this last time. My friend says, what is the greatest era, the golden era of science fiction writing? The 20s, the 30s, the 40s, 50s, or now? And he says, the greatest era is when you're a teenager.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what I think you're saying is between 12 and 16, music makes the biggest impact on us.
Yep.
Those are the songs that really impact us. And then, you know, it varies throughout our lives, but it is something about our formative age. You bringing in history, in memory, in that question was really good. So I wanted to delve into time. And I know that you talked about the intro to your Kennedy Center concert, the song that you wrote, 9/11. You talked about space and time. You said space needed to change. And so I wanted to, first of all, before I get into time, just tell you that in studying Finnegan's Wake and Marshall McLuhan and James Joyce, we learned this thing that the ear might be more time and the eye might be more space. Rather than going into it deeply, just your hunch or guess on that thought, that the ear is time, the eye is space.
Well, I think in some aspects, I think that's very, very true. But actually, you know what I've been thinking? I actually had a lecture at like some conferences like many years ago, because I had this idea in that I actually think sound I don't know about the ear, but the ear is actually what picks up sound for us. So, but this isn't so much of sound based on space, though. You know what I mean? And
Sound
not
is
only,
based, you're saying sound is based on space?
or so much of our experience of it is based on space, and not only in that it happens in space. I have like sound cannot happen outside of space, right? Now, but another interesting thing is that when a piece of music is being played, it dominates the space in it. You actually have to escape that space in order to be free from the sound, right? Especially if we're talking about a piece of music, which tends to be loud. It needs to be heard, and it's a domineering presence, right? And I've
Yeah.
always found that aspect of music and sound in general, but especially music, because music is sound that is begging to be paid attention to, right? So it dominates sound in a way, or dominates space in a way that's different from sound that we forget, right?
Yeah.
Or that we don't pay attention to. Even though even in those instances, if you take away that sound, even if we're not noticing it, it will become noticeable because it is defining and it is creating the condition for our normal experience with space to begin with. So actually, I would say sound is more about space and music is about time, because music is how we order this thing called space,
Yeah.
or this thing that happens in space. And so music is because it's about order, then ourselves come out of it. And I think what I mean by that is time comes from us,
Yeah.
whereas space is something we exist in. And
Really good.
yeah, and I can dig deeper into that, but that's
That-
always how I think about it.
That's basic, and things will come around because Sunra nailed it. He said, "Space is the place."
Yeah,
That's his main thing. And
yeah,
Dante wanted to eliminate time and space and then go to paradise. And Albert Einstein said time and space are one thing. Same thing as the Incas. They regard time and space as a single concept, pancha, P-A-C-H-A. So that's good because it's sort of an intro. This is a little long wrap, but the basic question is, why is 4/4 time the most commonly used time signature in Western music? Now I'm going to set it up a little. Besides being intuitive and easy, it might be because it's in sync with our heartbeat rhythm. Captain Beefheart varied from what he called the mama heartbeat. He said that for the same old 4/4 time rhythm is related to fascism. It's so fixative, so hypnotic, so synthesized that it's dangerous to the heart. It's faster than the heart. Disco is dangerous. He wanted non-hypnotic music to break you out of the catatonic state. So there's a lot to unpack there, but basically, why is 4/4 time the most commonly used time signature in Western music?
Well, I this is honestly probably more of a historian is going to give you a more historical answer, but I am not going to answer this question directly because I think it would be more interesting is instead of trying to give a historical answer, which I'm not a historian, but talk about. But I think my answer is an answer, and I think it is right. It's just not a historical answer, which is that it's a simple answer. It's convention. It's convention. You know, it's convention. And I don't personally believe that. Not that I think our natural, you know, like you said, the heartbeat and all these things do play a role, but social things, social conventions don't happen naturally. If you know what I mean. It's always a social endeavor. It can't be, you can't boil it down to natural phenomenon. That's like boiling down, you know, a line written by Shakespeare. Like, for example, if Shakespeare writes in Romeo and Juliet, Juliet is the sun, it's like trying to say, okay, what does he mean by that? Is he talking about our sun in our solar system, or is he talking? You know what I mean? When you take it literally like that, you kind of lose the point.
Alfred, let me interrupt 1 second. They asked Robert Frost, could you explain this poem? And he said, you mean you want me to say it worse?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's what you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I mean by that is is that social phenomenon, I think, needs to be explained as social phenomenon. And those other things you can take into consideration. But I think something like 4/4 time, which is so steeped, like you said, in Western music, in so many songs, so many conventions, even jazz. Like 4/4 is the fundamental way we play jazz. And as a jazz musician, I feel so comfortable playing in 4/4 way more than other time signatures, even though I can play in other time signatures, because there's just a whole history and vocabulary and way of doing it that we created. Yeah. Now, what I do find interesting is that, like you were saying, they were saying it's like a fascism of a kind. I do think, like I was saying, music, the way it dominates sound, I think 4/4, also equal temperament, and all these kinds of conventions kind of have a domineering role and crowd out other possibilities. I think that is for sure. Yeah. I'm not so surprised that particularly these are conventions coming from a culture that likes to do that. It's no surprise that because 4/4, at least as I understand it historically, existed in Western music before, but conventionalization of music in so many areas, equal temperament, music theory, and all of these things, and also especially are the importance of the composer and so many conventions of orchestral music and all this coincided with the Europeans' rise in power and the way they tried to categorize, conventionalize, and dominate the world. Right? I don't think it's a coincidence that these and they're focused on the individual, right? So now the composer is so important. Nobody improvises anymore after a while, and now we just have to play it word by word by the great composer and the way they wrote it. That all those things I don't think are coincidental, and I do think there's a problem with the way 4/4 and other conventions of music theory, like especially when I'm teaching, because I teach young kids too. I mean, the way we teach kids, so much of it is based on just teaching them how to read European classical music, even though nobody that I teach is going to play that for the rest of their lives. So, you know what I mean? And not that there's anything wrong with it. It's good. I like a lot of it, but it is kind of weird. That's how we teach kids music. So there is something weird going on. There's something domineering, authoritarian, that crowds out other possibilities for sure. And I definitely think something like that is happening. I mean, it's really weird.
You opened up a lot there, because one, I have to go back. I forgot to say this in talking about time and space and the eye and the ear. We don't have ear lids. We have eyelids. So even though we have ear lids, you can't block sound out. You can put your fingers and put muffs and it still leaks through. Oh, yeah. But eyelids shut it off. You cannot see. The other thing was, what do you think is the time signature of the heartbeat? Your guess or your hunch?
I don't think such a thing exists.
It doesn't exist.
There is no natural. I mean, what is a time signature to begin with, right? That's not a natural thing, right? That's, I'm sure we had, like, because of our heartbeat and things, we liked certain steady tempos and things like that. But to make it a convention and attach numbers and all of these things to it, that's not natural.
It's authoritarian. But you know what you said was really cool, because I do photography workshops, and I go, Billy Wilder, great American film director, said black and white is more true than color. Why would he say that? And most people go, oh, there's less information. And I'm like, hardly anyone ever says, because it's the convention. We grew up seeing more black and white photography, setting out what is the truth in this medium, painting with light photography.
Right.
And we saw more black and white movies and more black and white photography. So the convention said, oh, that's more true. But we live in a color world. So why would he say black and white is more true than because of convention? That's what you really nailed it. Yeah. Social phenomenon. Yeah.
And that's also really interesting because color is, especially if you're talking about color, what the fuck is color? You know, what do you think it is? It doesn't exist outside of us, right? The natural world is not colored, right? As far as we know, it's how our brains and our eyes interpret the way things are reflected, you know, and how other animals sometimes seem to have similar, but also a lot of animals seem to be quite different. It's not objective. It's the most subjective thing, but it feels like the most natural thing.
We show black and white film on an art gallery wall with a video projector, and you can see these I call them Ben Gay, but Ben Day patterns in the black and white shirt, and there's color in it. There's no color on the screen, but we're seeing color.
Yeah, because it's all in there.
It's all in there.
Yeah.
So let's jump into silence. How do you know when not to play? I mean, you know, that is like the total Monk thing I told you last time. My friend says, Monk heard all the notes Charlie Parker heard, but only decided to play some of them. Monk actually nails it. He said silence is the loudest sound in the universe.
Oh, yeah. And also, I mean, especially the way Monk, like Monk is a little different. Like, I think there are other, like if we're talking about jazz improvisation, and I can talk more beyond that too, because I've been, you know, like I've read John Cage's book, Silence. Like this is something I'm pretty fascinated by. But I think it's interesting to talk about from a jazz perspective, which is a particular way of looking at it. And Monk, particularly, his silences are loud because jazz improvisation is very linguistic in nature, right? It flows like a language. A lot of the improvisatory languages were created by horn players who have to breathe like real people. And like language itself, you have to know the harmony and the chord changes and all these things so well that you can create melodies with a story. That's traditional jazz improvisation. Now, Monk, we all know from the way he speaks, the way he speaks is not, I don't want to sound denigrating because that's not what I'm trying to say, but his humor is not, like his intelligence is not a fluid, eloquent, erudite type of intelligence that he likes to partake in. I'm sure he can do it because some of his songs are really complicated, but the intelligence that he enjoys is the intelligence or the funny jokes that he comes up with that are kind of, you know, one-liners, you know, what, like weird
he's a one-liner. That's why one little thing, Alfred, no one should do Monk covers. I mean, it is like ridiculous. I've heard them done for years and everybody overplays. It's like, please leave this alone. But you know, there's a few, I'm sure, you know.
He's so such a, you know, character that it's hard to not sound like him when you're trying to sound like him. But I think you see that in the way he talks and a lot of his humor in the way he talks. Like you read accounts of how other people in their interactions is he won't say things for like a long time, but then he just says this one line that's like the most hilarious thing, and everybody, you know, starts laughing, and you hear that in the way he plays, and that kind of humor only works because of that silence, that awkward amount of silence that it's
the juxtaposition. But that's exactly the question I'm trying to get you to delve into. But before you do, this is McLuhan because you bringing up humor in Monk is so important to me. And you say it's humor and intelligence. It's
Yes.
not to discount it as, oh, he's a jokester. He knows the depth. And check out this line that McLuhan said of Joyce's use of the pun. Joyce used the pun as a way of seeing the paradoxical exuberance of being through language.
Yeah.
So that's Monk. Monk used humor or space as a paradoxical exuberance of being through music.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unbelievable. So how I mean, it's easy. I learned. I mean, how did you learn how to not overplay? How did you learn when to incorporate silence? Or maybe that's not the question I should be asking. You can take it wherever you want. How does one learn silence? The incorporation of silence, because all I see on YouTube is these cats that can play a gazillion notes. I mean, I love watching Domi play the Flintstones theme in 1 minute.
Woo!
She play. Have you seen that? She plays. She plays Joe Zawinul, Art Tatum, Fats Waller, everybody in the history of 1 minute, and she does it with her own personality. But it's like way too many notes, girl.
Yeah. Well, I think those are actually almost two questions. In that, I think I can answer them in two different ways. The first answer I can give is like a more practical answer. As a jazz performer, how do you incorporate silence into your performer as a non-breathing instrumentalist? That, I think, is the real key question that we pianists ask amongst ourselves, because we don't have to breathe.
Non-breathing as opposed to a horn player. Okay,
horn players who have to pause.
Yeah.
Now, for pianists, I think for me, I tend to like, and I really appreciate you saying I try to bring silence in, but often, man, I my hands like to talk, like so my hands like to talk, I sometimes I struggle reining that in, but I've gotten better for sure, especially compared to when I was really young, even compared to a couple of years ago. And I think it's just that I like, maybe I'm too ADHD if it's too much information. And like I said earlier in our interview, I like music that I can remember and keep coming back to.
Yeah.
That stays with me. And when each note matters more, it stays with me more. It tends to stay with me more. And I also like elegant storytellers. I like elegant storytellers. So, like I like improv. I love Red Garland. He's one of my heroes. I love the way he improvises.
I always play him.
Yeah, I love it. Monk is great too, and I also like really energetic improvisers too, like Herbie, especially when he was playing with Miles. The way Herbie, like with him and Tony Williams, and those guys, like they were really going for something. It gets out there, like they're really challenging things. But Herbie, even though he can get out there, like there's always like Herbie's always working with like a core idea that he begins with. He's just so creative that he takes it somewhere that nobody expected at the time when he was doing that.
Really quick, you ever hear Herbie's solo in the George Clinton Parliament album, Bill Laswell producing, and he goes Herbie, and Herbie takes a solo, and it's not too many notes. It is so exactly what you said. It is elegant storytelling.
Yeah, the way Herbie. And also, so that's definitely part of it too. But then there's the whole element of silence as a concept, right? Like with John Cage, he showed in his famous song that everyone likes to joke about, where silence is full of stuff, right?
Yeah,
silence is full of stuff. But one aspect about silence that I've been thinking about as an improviser is that I think is interesting, and it's related to what what we talk about with Monk, is sometimes I purposely interrupt my thoughts to bring silence, because when you, like, especially as an improviser, when you've gotten used to being able to play what you hear in your head, when you've gotten to that level where you can play everything, not everything, but like a lot of the things that, like most of the things that you can hear in your head, that's a nice place to be, especially when you weren't there when you were younger. But when you do that too much too, you start sounding stale and much like your older self. So another thing that silence is not just a space between two things. Sometimes silence is a breakage. Silence to me, sometimes as an improviser, is about interrupting myself, is to cause trouble, cause problems for myself. Because now that I have a problem, I have to solve it in the moment, to stop, and also, especially jazz improviser, we think of time spatially, where you can start your phrase on beat one or on the end of one or at the end of three and all these things. And how do you carve your space? Phrasing, am I always phrasing things the same way? And interrupting myself or giving myself time to literally think, it can be risky, because you're now challenging yourself and going to places that you're not comfortable, but it's a necessary part of the process. And I hear a lot of the great improvisers talk about the importance of these kinds of things. So silence, John Cage talks about how it's full, he shows that it's full of stuff, because when there's no music playing, audiences, you can hear the audiences, you can hear all these things. So silent, but I also think silence can be an active thing. Like Monk actively keeps an awkward pause, an awkward amount of silence to make his joke work. It can also be an active disruption to your usual thought processes, so that you have now a problem to solve, and hopefully, start becoming a more interesting improviser, and you're actually thinking on your feet as opposed to just playing whatever, is conventional, especially if the song asks for it. If the song where, because some songs, like if I'm playing behind a vocalist in a very traditional jazz setting, it would be actually kind of weird for me to like pause for too long, because people would be like, "What are you doing?" But in a more improvisatory setting, that's also, a lot of people who like that music are going there to hear people really challenge themselves, right? So it's appropriate.
Yeah, beautiful, Alfred. You're really articulate and concise, and I appreciate it. Because they asked McLuhan once, will there ever be silence? And he said, things don't exist on their own. They only exist in relationship. So let's go through a couple other quotes on silence and see if it spurs any other thoughts.
Sure.
The artist, for me, silence is music.
Well, it is definitely a huge part of it. I've been reading the philosopher Deleuze recently. He's been really interesting to me. And the way Deleuze talks about everything, because he has a philosophy of everything. And the way Deleuze thinks about things, it has been really interesting. And I think it makes and it solves a lot of problems. Because, philosophy traditionally had a problem where they tried to say that things were different substances. For example, the soul and the body are totally different things, but somehow there's a connection, and then they've all kind of failed to explain how there are these two totally different things. There's this connection. Same thing with God and the world, God and human beings. Totally, it's separable, separate, distinct things, but yet there's a connection somehow. What Deleuze, actually Spinoza did it first, and Deleuze took from Spinoza, is that they're not different. They're not different, totally fundamentally different things. They're part of the same thing. It's just the same thing can be so many things. So one analogy that I love, I think as an interpreter of Deleuze, somebody said that, what they mean is that there's a piece of paper, and when you fold the piece of paper like origami, it can be infinite number of things, but it's still a piece of paper, and the way Spinoza tried to solve that problem of dualism is that he tried to do away with dualism altogether. Monism, it's just all one thing, one substance. right? Now, for me, the way I think about silence more and more these days, like maybe the person that you were mentioning in the quote, is that we tend to have this binary between silence and music, right?
Yeah.
And just like God and humans, soul and body. But I no longer think of it like that. I think of them as part of just one thing, you know. And obviously, you know, like you need silence to make sense of, you know,
Yeah.
the sound itself. But
Yeah.
not
Because
only,
Cage could not hear silence, though he went into the chamber to hear it.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah, silence. And
But me and you could go into the desert and I could say, hey, let's sit down. And I swear we would hear silence. But that's because we heard noise walking and driving to the desert. So
Yeah.
it's back to McLuhan. It's the relationship.
yeah, silence is a negation. It's not a
Yeah.
definitionally, silence is a negation, right?
Yeah.
But remember when I talked about silence as a positive activity, right?
Yeah.
As an activity, silence can be positive.
Yeah.
And what I mean by positive isn't that it actually is something, even though by definition it is nothing. You know what I mean? So that I find to be fascinating.
Well, how about Roscoe Mitchell? Silence is perfect. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean it's whole. Silence is whole.
Is wholeness, yeah. Whereas we think it's void. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's whole. But this is what I think is so interesting. By definition, silence is empty.
Yeah.
Right? By definition, it's empty. But what we see in real life, and also in the positive activity of silence, it seems to be whole. Now, what I'm saying, and this is and what I mean is not only that silence is whole, but emptiness is whole.
Yeah.
Is that's how I think about it. In that that, you know, if you try, where instead of putting emptiness and wholeness as two opposites that can't ever coincide, you know, that are totally separate substances like body and soul, maybe like if we think in like Deleuze, they're just the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, if at a certain level.
You got to hear, you know, Mats and Morgan, they played with Zappa when they were teenagers. They're from Sweden, and they played together, keyboard and drummer, for 45 years. And Mats is blind since birth. And I said, Morgan says, what does Mats see? He says he sees empty. He can put his hand in a bucket of water and feel the water in the sides of the bucket. Then you pour the water out and he puts his hand in here, and that's what he sees is empty. Now, that doesn't mean he's right, but it sort of got me, because people go, well, he sees gray or black. No, he doesn't. How can he? But, you know, it's an amazing phenomenon, because here's the next one, Bob Dylan. Experience teaches that silence terrifies the most.
Yeah. I think we talked about this a little bit before, in the previous interview, where when you're meditating, what you realize is your mind is constantly talking.
Right.
And it's not under your control when you realize it. It's that thought just kind of keeps happening. And what you are controlling is whether you pay attention, you know, how you, not even whether, because you're going to keep hearing it, but how you pay attention to it, right? So silence in that sense doesn't exist except in death, right? Death is total silence in that sense, right? That's when you'll stop hearing those things forever. And to the extent that, you know, death is terrifying, which I think it is to everybody, you know, it's definitely a terrifying thing. But also silence, if we think of it as the absence of sense, which is the absence of language, which is the absence of organization, which is the absence of structure and all these things, then like I'm doing in my improvisation, I'm interrupting all of those things to create something new, right? And that's terrifying. right?
Yeah.
And when you think of silence as a positive activity of disrupting what you're doing, where that's a terrifying place to be, right?
Yeah.
Now you have to like actually think on your feet and create something new, to fill in that silence, or you can dwell in that silence longer, you know, and that could be very, but whatever it is, it disrupts those things, and forces you to reckon and do things. So silence is terrifying, but fear is good. That's fear is a good thing.
And so here's the last silence quote, although I got 10 more on this page that we can cover. Speech is of time, silence is of eternity. Thomas Carlyle.
Well, it depends on what you mean, you know, because, you know, if we're talking about the silence between, you know, like between two words, that's that can, maybe you can define that as temporary. But if you mean silence, as I did earlier about death, yeah, death is eternal, right? So it depends on what you mean. I think, yeah.
Well, it's back to McLuhan saying, when they ask him, will there ever be silence? He says, nothing exists on its own. It only exists in relationship.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Now, you evoked a question I never get to ask because you're so fucking damn smart, Alfred. I don't know how you can be a jazz musician and a philosopher. Do you sit around and talk philosophy backstage with all these jazz bows?
No, to the audience.
To the audience. Yeah.
Who is this crazy guy?
Yeah. But here's Paul Bley. This is a little long, but it leads into something.
I love Paul Bley.
Oh, yeah. Paul Bley. I've spent many years learning how to play as slow as possible, and then many years learning how to play as fast as possible. At the present, I'm trying to spend as many years learning how to play as bad as possible. My solo piano playing is a question in itself. The question is why? And after why comes what? And after what comes when? Now, he sets up this whole thing for a question I used to ask, and I'm pulling it out of the closet for you. Of the 5 W questions, the 5 questions that start with W, what's your most important? Why, when, what, who, or where?
I think probably more. I'm trying to decide between what and why.
Wow, what and why?
Yeah, because where and when are not questions. Where and when, if you read Kant, where and when is embedded into who you are, like experience itself. So space and time are embedded into experience itself. So it's really, philosophers are questioning what and why, and who is not an interesting question to me.
Wow.
Because, who is, I don't care about who's.
Yeah.
Because who's don't run the world.
Yeah.
What's do. Why is how we understand the what. Yeah. So probably what. What is the most.
Wow. Well, guess what most people say.
What? Who?
Well, guess. What's your hunch?
Who? I guess. Or
no, why? Most people say why. Yeah. Why? But what do you, just back to the quote to set it up. What do you think? I spent all this time learning how to play slow. Then I turned to how to play fast. Now I turn to play bad. You know, my this is the line I love. My solo piano playing is a question in itself.
Yeah. I mean, because I am familiar with Paul Bley's playing and his work, that to me, I can't not think about this without thinking about the way he plays piano. But there's, I mean, Paul Bley himself is such a innovative and unique pianist that you hear it in the way he plays, in that he's not trying to play what the convention of bebop was at the time, even though he is of that era. Like, he's an old guy who was hanging out with all these people, but there's a recording. It's talked about a lot in school and amongst a lot of jazz musicians. There's a recording of him playing with I think it's with Sonny. He's playing All the Things You Are with I think it's, let me look this up.
Yeah.
It's with Sonny Rollins and I think it's Coleman Hawkins.
Yeah.
And this is I think a recording in like the late 1950s. So, you know, very much bebop era still. And the
Yeah.
way solos over, he's literally playing in another key most of the time. And not only is he playing in another key, the phrasing is like super modern as what we call modern these days because of people like him. And, you know, and it's super weird, but awesome. And, you know, and a lot of it is he's breaking away like rhythmically from what like the 4/4 time that we talk about, that things that we have conventionally in bebop have established are the popular ways of interpreting the rhythm. I mean, he's like being rhythmically very challenging and going into really weird places, leaving spaces and pauses that we don't usually do when we're making or creating bebop lines. And it's fascinating because it's 1959. Right?
Wow.
That's when it came out, or it might even be earlier. But it's 1950s when this is happening. It's so he was always been really forward thinking. And then you listen to like a solo piano album of his. I think it's Open to Love. That it's pensive. It's contemplative in nature when you listen to it. It's searching the way he plays. He's not just riffing lines to fill up the space and outline the chord changes, which is a cool thing to do, especially, you know, when nobody used to do that and Charlie Parker starts doing it. That's like mind blowing. But I think it was the 1970s when he recorded Open to Love. You know, this is when people like he led the charge are breaking away from that towards something new. And you really hear it in the way he plays. I mean, he innovated in so many different ways, harmonically, rhythmically, conceptually, the way you think about lines, the where you leave space, what your relationship to space is. And you know, and that really and all those quotes, it makes sense. You know, like sometimes I do that too. Like I remember when I have gigs where I'm not really trying to like perform to like impress, because sometimes you got to do that for your career, you know, like maybe there's some people in the audience that you want to impress, but like where it's just the space for me to like experiment. Something I do is I try to break away from the way I play is I'll try to like play something that is might be interpreted as bad. Right?
And exactly. You have that. You're anticipating a question coming up. That's amazing, because that's Don Preston, dude, amazing pianist. He's still playing, like 98, and he says, "Don't think when you improvise." And you're saying, "No, I can't erase all that, but I can do this. I can." But I wanted to ask you really quick, just go on a quick tangent. Did Bud Powell do more what Paul was doing, or more what Monk was doing, or something completely different?
I think Bud Powell, I think he's doing his own thing.
Yeah.
Stylistically, he is very similar to Charlie Parker. But if you listen to the way Bud Powell plays, it's a lot more erratic than people give him credit for. So, for example, one person to compare him with is, someone I learned from, who's a great pianist, Barry Harris. Right, Barry Harris has been around for a long, long time.
Yeah,
and you hear that in his playing. The way he plays bebop is elegant. It is economic in the sense that he doesn't overplay. He just plays exactly everything has been distilled. Now, when you listen to Bud Powell, even though he's the thing that Barry Harris is trying to distill, Bud Powell is a lot more frenetic. It's more chaotic. There's a lot more things that are like, you know, like his touch is not it's not as intentioned.
Yeah.
Not, you know, compared to Barry Harris, who's like really, you know, distilled it to a pristine degree. It's not pure, like 100% pure water, right? Barry Harris is probably the closest we have to 100% distilled bebop, because he has spent a lot of time doing that. But Bud Powell is less so, even though he's the origin, right? And I think that says a lot about the process of history, right? History kind of works like that, right?
Yeah.
Things are a lot messier. The things that we have distilled and categorized and written about in our history books that we, you know, write in a couple of sentences that are understandable for our students, in their actuality are a lot dirtier, lot murkier, and then history makes it out to be. And I that's how I would always, that's at least from my experience studying Bud Powell and listening to Bud Powell, even though he's like, for bebop jazz pianists, he's like the gold standard, kind of the original / gold standard. Someone Barry Harris spends so many times studying and trying to distill in his own way, which is beautiful, but it's different. It's very different.
But didn't Monk look up to Bud and say, "I'm going to bring in this other pianist"? Everybody, hey, we came to see you.
He did, because Bud could do what Charlie Parker did on the saxophone, but on the piano. But this is also different, and I think this is quite interesting, is that Charlie Parker, in my opinion, is more distilled, even though he's supremely virtuosic. His lines and the way he plays them are less messy than Bud Powell's, who is equally virtuosic, equally verbose, equally. But there's something about Bud Powell that's more. It sounds like he's challenging himself more, whereas Charlie Parker just sounds like someone who had everything from the beginning, who can say every word out there and was just born that way. Whereas Bud Powell is interesting because he sounds like someone who wasn't born with everything, but he is somehow reaching everything with his capacities, which is, I think, it's very, very different from Charlie Parker. Even though stylistically they're very similar.
Really, you're so intelligent about this, because I love talking music breakdown like this, because now you've double duty to interrobang the tangent into, look at who we're talking about, Alfred. It's Questlove's a subtitle to the Sly Stone, The Burden of the Black Genius. So you got Bud, Monk, and Bird.
Yeah,
they're all like considered, they're problem childs or whatever, whatever you want to call it. They had some sort of, I don't even like to say problem, because we talked about it we before, but then the king of it all. Do you know this theory, which my friend says is not true? Buddy Bolton, supposedly, the main influence on Louis Armstrong, no recordings, supposedly was nuts, and that's why he invented jazz improvisation. So jazz was being played like European music, and then all of a sudden he started improvising on the street, and Louis would hear him walking down the street, and then they threw him in a mental hospital for 30 years. That's the irony of jazz, is it was invented by a guy who's a nut. I'm not using the correct words, but you know what I'm saying. Neurodivert.
Yes,
it was invented by. But any thoughts on that, just as a quick tangent?
Well, the way I think about it, I think it also has a lot to do with history of history of how we've treated Black people in general. Because it's not like, yes, I'm sure, poor, oppressed, atypical industry people who are many of them who went to serve in World War II, many of these people with substances readily available to them, did they probably have problems? Yes. But was this country more interested in imprisoning and torturing, literally torturing? You hear the processes that they put them through in the hospitals. It's what we would consider torture now. Were they more likely to treat him like that compared to, I mean, they're real examples. I think it's, I forgot, there's like a white female jazz singer whose name I can't remember, compared to Billie Holiday, who also had a heroin addiction. The American government didn't just imprison her and like let her die. They treated her with a lot more care. So I do think there's like a bias in general in the way we treat Black people, but I also don't want to go down the path of saying they were all like what we would call mentally normal, because I don't think mentally normal is possible in the conditions that I outlined above, you know, because it's why would you be mentally normal in the conditions that I described just now? You know, that would be kind of weird.
Well, guess what, Alfred? You nailed it. I saw Questlove at the Sly Stone screening, and he's got guilt feelings.
Yeah.
He's dealing with guilt because he's, you know, not neurally diverse, and he's successful.
Yeah.
And so he's like, oh my God, my heroes all went through this, and I'm not going through that so much. So it is quite important. I mean, I think I would love to do a whole podcast on just politics and, you know, that whole aspect of what you just brought in. But, you know, I wanted to go on with our script here. And did you know your Kennedy Center concert included a song has the words dog meat?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Did you know previous to naming that song that Frank Zappa had a song called Dog Meat?
No, I didn't. No.
Oh, look it up. You have to, because it's in Uncle Meat, and it's one of his greatest albums. But here's in 1969, the LA Free Press, great underground newspaper in LA, asked Frank this question in regards to Pauline Oliveros' work with sound, above the audible and below creating a mass. And Frank said, not that it created a mass, it created something audible. It created a sum indifference tone, which happened to be located within the audible frequency range. By combining something so high you couldn't hear it and something so low you couldn't hear it, it yields something in the middle you could hear. Whether or not you liked what you heard in the middle is another question. The concept's brilliant. So any thoughts on this sum indifference tone, so high, so low?
Well, I think it actually, to me, it brings us back to what we talked about with color, and that sound doesn't exist in the world, right? Without us, like without someone to hear, right?
Yeah.
We are the ones who our bodies are designed to interpret and hear the different amplitudes that happen in the world in the way that we do, right?
Yeah.
And just like there are optical illusions, there are auditory illusions too, because it all is an illusion at the end. Yeah. Sound and color, the way I think about it, there's a philosopher, Daniel Dennett, who talked about it. I think it actually is is apt, is that consciousness is not a reflection of the operation as is. Consciousness is more like the user interface that we use on the computer. It's the icons and the clicking that we do, not the actual numbers 1 and 0 going on underneath it, right? And consciousness gives us the feeling that that the thing that we're clicking with the icons and everything is the actual real thing, right? And so, you know, because that's how I understand sound, that's how I understand color. It's you know, weird things happen when we mess with the limits of our sound and our vision. You know, things that don't exist or things that aren't supposed to technically exist keep happening to us. And
how do you spell the last name of Daniel?
Daniel Dennett is Dennett.
Yeah, because actually it's so funny. The timing is cosmic. I'm doing part 2 with Chris Fuller, a musician in New York, in a couple days, and he's the one who said this, and we brought it up last time. He said consciousness is a stowaway on the boat, and we think we're running the boat, and actually the stowaway's running the boat.
Yeah.
That sounds like what Daniel said.
Yeah. Daniel Dennett, he's interesting.
Yeah.
The way he thinks consciousness is kind of an illusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, not it's the experience, but it's not the thing that's running the show that in the way that we feel like it is, right?
Yeah, that's Laycock too. Yeah, and Laycock. Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. He's a linguist, right?
Yeah. Okay, here's Ruth Draper. The key is to bring, the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. That sounds good, but how do you do that? I mean, you're going from Kennedy Center to, small jazz bars. How do you bring the audience up onto the stage with you?
Personally, because a lot of my songs are very conceptual and densely conceptual and in nature, and also very personal, especially my latest album that came out, is that I just I explain it to them in a concise way, and I talk to them, hey, this is how I wrote this music. These are all the, I don't explain everything, but the important bits. And I talk about how, and especially I've noticed when I talk about how it relates to my life, that, in ways that other people can relate to, when I give sufficient time to explain and set the scene for the music for them to interpret, I have noticed, especially if it's in a setting where I can do that, people respond to it differently, I've noticed, for sure. Now, that's the way I tend to do it. But what's really interesting is a lot of jazz musicians want the music to speak for itself.
Yeah.
To not say anything and just let the music speak for itself. And I find that interesting because I'm the opposite. I don't care about the music just speaking for itself because I don't think music has a privileged position in meaning. I do think it has a unique position in meaning, in that it, you do have a different experience if nobody explains the music to you and you listen to the music and you have a good time and an interesting experience. That's a special experience. But I think a lot of musicians tend to privilege that experience and say that is the best way to interpret music. But for me, I don't necessarily think that way. Because if you listen to programmatic music or Wagner, not really. That's not the point. It's total art, right? For Wagner, it was a total work of art. It's the whole package. That's the actual experience for him. I'm not saying that experience it should be privileged either. Yeah. But that's just the way I tend to write. And that's the way I tend to experience my compositions. So I just share that with the audience. But if somebody has a better time experiencing it without all of that, and they had a good time with it, I have no problem with that. And all kudos to them, right? All power to them. But
Alfred, where'd you get that from? Because first of all, I want to interject. You got this big band. I mean, what is it, 13 or 14 pieces?
Yeah, right.
And, my eyes, you're off to the side once the song, there's not a lot of close-ups on you. It's a wide shot. And the guy who got me most involved in your songs was your French horn player, because a little. But it is hard to expect musicians to stand there and act like they're into the music. The jazz dudes would go off the stage and smoke a cigarette, and it was like ruin the buzz of the, we're supposed to be paying attention. But where did you learn that? How did you develop that aspect? I'm going to explain it. I'm going to and not, that philosophy,
Well, I think it's because just the nature of the songs, as the way I write them are.
But so... I mean, pre-writing the song, because I mean, the funny thing is, the irony, Alfred, is that that's how I learned of you, was as a tutorial. And then I go, oh, you're a musician. Now, most of these people I hit up on YouTube are musicians, and they do these tutorials explaining stuff. But in your sense, I got so intrigued. I didn't hear your music first and go, I want to interview you because of your music. I heard your tutorial. Well,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
did, yeah, I mean, was it naturally for you to become a teacher? And that's how, I mean, or maybe it's your uncle telling you, you know, hey, I want you tell him I'm into philosophy, and then he gets intrigued. Oh, philosophy, I mean, that it's sort of like that curiosity you have to verbalize.
Yes, I do think that's a really interesting thing you pointed out, and in that, yeah, that's kind of how I interact with everything, like, so what if it's Monk. I made those videos when I was really digging into Monk and studying him, and I
Yeah,
found that, and those videos I shared because I thought I had found something about Monk as I learned his songs and played them so many times that I didn't hear a lot of people talk about, but they're very um, noticeable, striking
yeah,
aspects of Monk's music that not everybody talks about. So some of the videos I talk about how a lot of his music, it's like, not only is jazz music usually 4/4, but we feel comfortable improvising over 4 measure phrases. Like the melody is and that feels comfortable. Whereas Monk would often write stuff that's like 5 measures or 7 measures. That's kind of weird, and that makes it hard for us to improvise because we're not used to that, you know. Um, and it's kind of a little off kilter, like a lot of his jokes and like some of his melodies or his harmonic choices. And I talk about how that seems to be something that's a pretty important part of Monk that I don't see in a lot of his contemporaries, in a lot of the music that we play from that era. That seems to be a pretty noticeable aspect of Monk. So I chose to share it because I thought it was interesting. But the propensity to try to distill it in a way that I think is coherent and understandable. I think it just comes from, that's how I understand it. Like like especially when you read philosophy, philosophy is so effing difficult because
yeah,
it's written, but a lot of it is written by these old guys hundreds of years ago in a language that wasn't written in English oftentimes, writing to other philosophers who know a bunch of
yeah,
Latin and weird words, talking to each other, communicating to each other. And I have to, about really difficult topics in really creative and challenging ways, that I have to be able to distill it in the way Barry Harris distilled Bud Powell, in order for me to understand it better and especially tell it to other people, because I like talking about it too, because it's fascinating, right? And I'm not going to talk about it in a way that's
but
confusing to people. I want to talk.
is that curiosity drive more from you or more from the DNA? I know you don't like that question, but I mean, is some of it in your DNA to be curious and to verbalize, or is it more you got it on your own?
Um, I don't know, but I do. It is something that's been around for a while. I
Yeah,
think I do. I'm fascinated by these kinds of questions, and I also think it helps clarify. Like I feel like when after studying philosophy for so long, I don't know things, but I know what I don't know. Like
that,
Socrates would say, and I know why I don't know what I don't know, and I know
yeah,
how I don't know what I don't know, because that's kind of what philosophy is about, right?
yeah,
And I walk, so I am not confused when I don't know something, or when I do know something, I'm not confused by it. Some
yeah,
people I notice are quite confused, even
yeah,
when they know something, because they don't know why they know it, or
yeah.
how they know. Whereas I tend to have a better idea of it, like any person who studied philosophy a lot. So to me, it helps clarify, and it
Yeah.
also helps ask interesting questions as opposed to boring questions, right?
Yeah.
Like because those guys were always asking interesting questions, right? So
Well, that's back to John Cage. That's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer. Okay, here's Leonard Cohen, Alfred. The only way you can sell a concert is if you put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. What role does risk play in your creative process?
well, I think there's risk, creative risks, and all these other things you can talk about, like financial risk, like actually spending the money to like promote and all, there's risk at many levels. But I think the hardest risk, and it's the most important risk, especially if, and it's not a guarantee for success. It's not a guarantee for bringing a lot of people to your concert. But I do think it is a requirement for memorable, interesting art is vulnerability, is to be able to delve deep into yourself, so to get at something so intimate and fundamental, but also at the same time universal, that a lot of people can identify with in yourself. Then people pay more attention. If I just if I talk to you trivially, then you're gonna treat me as a trivial person, right? But if I take the time to take you seriously, you and your time seriously, and try, at least even if I'm not successful, but show that I'm trying to do something interesting, I do think there's an amount of respect that comes with that. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work out. You might just do it in a way that turns some people off. But if you want your art to be more than, oh, that was a decent, good time, and then they forget about it, which is not the worst thing. The worst thing is that was a terrible time. I want to forget it, but
that's Coleman. Coleman Hawkins says when you make mistakes, that means you're trying.
Yes.
But for the Kennedy Center, did you propose to them or did they come to you?
Oh no, they were trying to cancel me. I don't know if you saw this whole thing. They were trying to cancel me. They tried to.
But they booked you first. I mean, how do you get the booking at the Kennedy Center? You have to apply.
Oh, someone I knew someone there, and then there was an opening, so they suggested me. But then
So
after
you didn't peddle yourself to them. They booked you.
They booked me, but then and then they looked into what I was about, and then I told them the kind of program that I was going to do, and given that it's run by the government now that doesn't like certain things, they were someone up. There's a news article about this too. There's someone higher up told the person who booked me that we don't want him anymore. He is too controversial. We need to kick him out. And I made a whole hullabaloo, and I made a big fuss about it. And then they kept me around.
Oh my God, that's a
yeah, they did not want me there.
Okay. Anyways, it was very intriguing, and you're in company with a lot of great people. I went down the list there. So, but here's the thing about to follow up on the Leonard Cohen. If you don't, if you're not vulnerable, people know, and you covered that well. In fact, a great singer for Frank Zappa for many years, Napoleon Murphy Brock, I asked him that question, and I says, what role does risk play in your creative process? And he goes, I leave that in the dressing room. So in a way, what he was saying to me was, I have to show that I have confidence that I know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So you're saying, I know that risk, vulnerability plays a role in my creative process, that it takes courage. What does courage mean to you now? Didn't it take courage to show vulnerability, to take risk? Yeah. And what does courage mean to you?
Well, courage, the typical answer is to do that which you fear because you think it's the right thing to do. But courage in the sense of performance and vulnerability is that, for example, like let's say you're talking to someone, right? And vulnerability doesn't have to be like I'm just like dropping, like dropping all of my trauma onto you. That actually might not be a very vulnerable thing. That can be an abusive thing. But it's about, letting down your guards and your ego to the point where so that you can make it about having a genuine conversation with that person, whether it's comical, whether it's serious, whether what it is, but where you're prioritizing their needs over yours, right? And that means you're going to be open. And in order to do that, you have to let down your guard. And when you let down your guard, that's a scary thing to do because now you're not going to always be protected from everything. But the thing you gain from that is that, people can tell when that's kind of the secret of charisma, right? When we say someone is charismatic, it's when they're the first person to laugh because they're allowing themselves to laugh at something with risking that maybe everybody else in the room doesn't think it's funny and makes you look like a fool, but they're still opening up to that possibility. And because they're charismatic people, that usually makes everybody else laugh. And now everybody else feels at ease to laugh and express themselves and be comfortable with all these things. I think, vulnerability doesn't just mean like, I'm going to show you all my weakness. That can be part of it, depending on the conversation. But I think it's about opening, putting down your guard so that we can have an open conversation, whatever the topic is, if it's comical or, and I think it translates on stage as well. Like if someone's on stage and they clearly seem uncomfortable to talk to you, they don't want to, they don't look at you in the eye, they don't seem comfortable to talk to you and confident, you're going to feel guarded too, the person who's being talked to. But if the other person, even though they don't know you, just seems friendly and seems like they want to talk, then you're going to put down your guard too. So I think that's what it is, really.
Yeah, I think Napoleon said that because he knows he's charismatic and he can kind of cover it up, that he does go out there with risk, but he doesn't want to say I go out there and utilize risk in my creative process because he wants to appear confident,
Yeah.
And he had to play really complex music with Zappa. And then all of a sudden, him and Frank would spontaneously make up verbal exchanges to fill in the songs. And it was all improvised. And he had to come right on the spot with these quick lines, like the line that I've repeated for my whole life, which I think is Zappa, tapping into his Zen roots, was nothing is what I want. And Frank goes, a true Zen saying, nothing is what I want. In actuality, Napoleon came up with that. But I credit it to Frank because it was his song. But it's beautiful. Now, this is Viola Spolin in the same sort of mode. This is the woman who used social work, role-playing exercises in Chicago and basically invented comedy improv. So this, like, she spawned the Growling, Saturday Night Live, everybody. And she said, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it. Yep. What role does struggle play in your creative process?
I struggle because nothing comes to me easily. that's one thing. That's one thing for sure. But another thing is I'm open to showing my struggle because I am not at least I try to be. I think that's when I'm at my best. Is when you're so focused on trying to do the best and risk yourself to get at that thing, then you can't spend your time worrying about how you look and does it look effortless and all these things, right? You're paying attention to getting it, So when I'm improvising, oftentimes people talk about how I contort myself, and I make faces, and I sometimes can be loud, and I used to be very self-conscious of that because that's not how I think of myself usually. But you know, it's just it's just something that happens because I'm, especially at my best, I'm trying to play something that's in my head rather than just let my hand play what it likes to, which sometimes is good. But like, and and another thing is, you know, is that people enjoy seeing someone who struggles, for sure. They identify with it. Yeah. But this is one thing though, that I think is interesting. What if you've struggled so much that now the struggle is no longer visible? Yeah. You know what I mean? What if you get to that stage where you're such a master like Barry Harris? It's so distilled, it's so natural. Barry Harris doesn't contort, he doesn't need to. It's so natural and fluid. We appreciate that too, though, right? Yeah. It's so interesting. Is that, yes, we like, you know, like we like that tragic structure that Aristotle talks about, where there's like this struggle and there's this climax at the end. We like that too, but then I think we also do like masterful, effortless performance. Like Red Garland is so effortless in the way he plays. You know, it's so light, it's so masterful, it's elegant. I love that kind of stuff too. And I also love the way, you know, like Monk is, you know, you can see his leg going up and down.
Physicality. Yeah, the physicality.
I love both. I love both.
Well, it sounded like you were describing Alfred does his Keith Jarrett imitations.
Sometimes I do. You know,
yeah, no, I think that's beautiful. Keith is like groaning and moaning and moving around, and then he goes, "Shut up! If you're gonna cough, go outside." You know? But do you know the great Ornette line to Keith? They're backstage and he goes, "Are you black?" Because Keith looks black because he's got an afro. He says, "Black," and Keith goes, "No." And Keith is not black. He's
no.
And he goes, "Are you black?" And Keith goes, "No." He said, Ornette says, "You have to be black." Yeah, you know, because you know the way he played. But anyways, you know, I asked for 90 minutes and we're already there. But I got one more question, and Alfred, sure. I'd love to do a part 3. It can be months down the road.
Yeah, man.
I want to get into art and science, politics, the philosophy of Derrida, Deleuze, Guattari, Zizek, and this whole thing about suffering. I got a whole new probe into, you know, the Zen teachers say that life is suffering, and Dylan says, why does it have to be suffering? Why do you have to emphasize suffering? I know it's this balance and all that, but this is Ben Ratliff, the writer. He wrote a big thick book on Bill Frisell. And have you seen that book? Yeah.
No, I haven't seen that book, but he's a great musician.
So. Okay, Ben, this is what Ben says. I mean sound as it has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So he would summarize Miles in 2 words: fragile and pointed. Train, slightly undercooked and urgent. Bill Frisell, wobbly and woozy. If a writer was going to summarize Alfred's sound in 2 words, and you respected this writer, what 2 words would you go, "Hey, they got me"?
Oh, I don't know. I think, to me, it's probably conceptual.
Oh, I like that. Very
conceptual
good.
And passionate. I think it's conceptual and passionate.
Yeah.
That's probably the 2 words I would describe.
Well, that's head and heart right there.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Because it's hard to separate them. I mean, our first talking together was, is it more this or more that? And you were usually like, hey, it's both. And it's the relationship of both and how they're integrated, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, for sure.
And I do really appreciate this, because I think that the phenomenon is that music is, why do we intellectualize about music? Because music is something different. I mean, we sort of got into that a little, but isn't it, it's not like, is it better to leave it alone and just appreciate it for what it is? But what an amazing practice that humans do to intellectualize about.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree with that. Is sometimes I think people who say stop intellectualizing and just leave it alone,
Yeah.
you know, I understand
Yeah.
if your only experience with that, kind of like 4/4 time signature, is that of intellectualizing,
Yeah.
then you are missing the point.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I would even say the other way around. If your only experience with music is
Yeah.
that as a creator who doesn't intellectualize, or who doesn't have that kind of experience, you're missing out on a whole bunch
Yeah.
of fun, like a bunch of
Yeah.
interesting experiences,
Yeah.
an array of experiences that's just as fascinating. And often, for me at least, I see this from a lot of creators, but then I'm like, but what about it from the audience's perspective? What about
Yeah.
it from the analyzer's perspective? What about
Yeah.
it from the perspective of history? What about it from the perspective of teachers, right? There's so many different perspectives to music other than the creators, which is an interesting,
Yeah.
way of doing it, but that's not the only one. And I don't even think it should even be privileged, is the way I think.
Yeah.
Is it doesn't stand at top. Depending on this, if you're in a classroom, maybe the teachers matter more. But like it's yeah, and I do think it's fast. Like, a lot of musicians complain about music critics, for example, and because it feels weird to be judged, right? Like, who likes being judged by this person who probably doesn't even play that well, right? Especially from the perspective of a musician. And I agree, it's annoying, especially sometimes. I think, like movies, for example, like everybody just goes to Rotten Tomatoes to check if a movie's good or not, right? And that kind of privileges the aggregate consensus of whoever these critics are. So there's something weird there. But if you live in a world without critics, is that really a more interesting world? I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say the world would be
both. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly. It would be weird to live in a world without critics. That means you're living in a world where people aren't willing to talk about and conceptualize and process and communicate to other people what they love so much about this great art, right? That's gone now, right? And that's just as weird as everybody just going straight to Rotten Tomatoes to check if the movie is good.
Well, Sam Goldwyn nailed it. He said, as for the critics, don't even ignore them.
Yeah.
But I love criticism, and I love people just naturally talking about music. This one friend of mine is a street musician, and he's really good, and we can talk guitars till the cows come home. And my favorite line is, I says, well, who are your main influences? He goes, all the CDs on my dashboard on my car, they all melted in together.
Yeah. I'm sure
and all week we hired last week Greg Cohen to play with my wife this amazing show, and dude, this guy played on 30 John Zorn albums. He played with Tom Waits for 20 years. He played with Alan Watts, and his main, I says, who is your main proud to play with? He says, Ornette Coleman. And so he's just been playing, and I ran into him in the grocery store, and we just started talking. When he was 16, he hung out with Captain Beefheart, like as a teenager in the neighborhood and just talk to him, listening to Coltrane and Albert Eiler. And I was like, all week I was going, man, I got to get Alfred together with Greg, this guy, so it is an amazing world that live music does, because it's the universal language. Like, do you know Korla Pandit? I'll leave you with this one. Korla Pandit, if I didn't tell you last time, Korla Pandit. So he played organ, Hammond B, on TV for 60 years.
Wow.
And he disguised himself as an Indian wearing a turban. And the story is amazing. You can watch the documentary on him, but just watch him play Hammond B for 5 minutes on YouTube. You'll freak out, because Art Tatum used to hang out with him and love him. He basically invented the Hammond B as a percussion instrument, because if you just hit it, it could sound sort of percussive.
Yep.
So, and it's endless. Slim Gaillard's my other favorite. He play piano as a trick with his fingers upside down. So check that clip out. It's like,
I will.
Yeah, Slim Gaillard. But anyways, Alfred, what a pleasure and an honor, and I thank you so much. We'll book a part 3 down the line, and keep on getting all those big bookings. Don't let them bump you out of these venues. I appreciate your persistence there and holding to it.
Yeah.
Because that was you covered some. I was wondering, how to get away with these topics in this venue, man.
That's why they're trying to cancel me.
Yeah, and that was heavy that you were able to do that before they fucking they just ziplock the doors from anything,
Yeah. Somehow got in there.
Okay, thanks again, Alfred. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button. Like I always say, I hope this never ends and we keep talking forever and ever.
Yeah, man. Thanks. Enjoyed it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.